Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our EMEA Market Insights webinar. I'm Emily Abbott, Senior Marketing Manager here at Spencer Ogden. We're really pleased to have you with us today as we walk through the latest findings from our Q3 Global Market Update and take a look at what the road to 2026 could mean for hiring and investment across infrastructure and sustainability. If you haven't downloaded or looked at our report yet, you can scan any of these QR codes behind us to have a look, and we will also send it to you after the session. Over the next hour, you're going to hear industry viewpoints and insights from your Spencer Ogden hosts here and also our industry panelists. There's going to be time for questions at the end as well. If you just use the Q&A box that you'll have on your screens, and then I will present these to our speakers later on. Following the session, we'll be sure to share the recording with you and also make sure that you follow us on LinkedIn for snippets and insights from today that we will also be sharing. I'm now going to hand over to Paul King and Scarlett Menzies from Spencer Ogden to kick off the session and introduce today's panel. Hope you all enjoy.
Thanks, Emily, and good afternoon and welcome everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time and joining us for our Market Insights webinar. As Emily said, we're really looking to explore latest hiring of skills, workforce trends that are shaping the energy infrastructure and sustainability landscape across EMEA. We've tried to create this webinar looking at three different lenses. On the call today, we have insight from LinkedIn, giving us a platform level view of hiring and skills movement around EMEA. Obviously, that's blended with the report that Emily was talking about earlier that hopefully people have seen or will see, which is our own proprietary Spencer Ogden EMEA data. And then delighted to say we've also got clients and industry experts who will really hopefully ground this conversation in real world activity and decision making. Before I introduce the people on the call, just wanted to briefly frame what we did observe in Q3 across EMEA, because it really does set the tone for what we're about to talk about today. So if we look at how we come to that data, it's really a blend of internal job flow, placement activity, candidate engagement, talent insights, and consultant intelligence from individuals across our business with up to 15 years experience of the markets. Hopefully combined, they give us a real clear picture of what's going on within the region. But just to summarize, I think there are a number of trends that we saw in Q3. Point one, we saw a little bit of softening in Q3, down about 5% quarter on quarter, but that's really driven by normal seasonal patterning and short-term project fluctuations. I think the most important aspect of that is that sentiment in the market remains really positive. Clients that we're talking to are becoming more strategic and long-term in their hiring decisions. Second point, I think, to probably summarize is that the infrastructure sector really continued to drive regional growth. We saw peak activity in data center delivery and expansion, particularly across the Nordics, but grid modernization and transmission projects, really that's supporting of energy transition and electrification demands, was significant. And then nuclear recommissioning and life extension work, which is re-emerging as a stable hiring engine. That's where we're really anchoring our demand for engineering, commissioning, construction management, project delivery professionals across the region, blended with those kind of trends that we're seeing there. The third point, I think, is that in our sustainability subsection, we've certainly remained active and we could see clear momentum within that. And whilst we see global fluctuations, EMEA, from our perspective, really maintains solid demand for solar and wind delivery, grid connection and commissioning talent, energy storage projects, as hopefully as policy direction becomes clearer, and decarbonisation roles that support the longer term transition goals. We're tending to see in this space that clients are leaning into capability building rather than high volume scaling at the moment, but we're certainly seeing a trend in that direction. In addition, natural resources, stuff that comes out of the ground, really showed stable but selective activity. Oil and gas mining in EMEA seems to be steady from our perspective, but focused on efficiency, maintenance and upskilling, probably rather than expansion. And when hiring does occur, it's quite regularly tied to safety critical work, asset integration, clean tech alignment versus anything else. As a blend of perm and contract hiring, we really saw across EMEA from our point of view that contract hiring remains the engine of EMEA's workforce model. We are seeing a lot of our regional demands still delivered through contract and contingent roles, particularly where projects are overlapping or where we're seeing timelines shift. However, that doesn't mean that permanent hiring is gone away. In actual fact, it is still very busy. It's just targeted and value driven, probably prioritizing senior technical skills and leadership, and also going into the finance, regulatory and project governance roles. So I think the clearest theme is this: we're seeing organizations are investing in capability-led hiring, stable, skilled teams that can deliver at pace, whilst supporting multi-year transition agendas. But then summarise with that, what are we expecting to see in EMEA based on our Q3 reports? Certainly there's some key points that come out in that. Hiring, we think, is going to remain resilient, but increasingly selective. Businesses and our clients, from what we're seeing, are really focusing on the roles that strengthen their long-term capability. So engineering, commissioning, automation, PMO, regulatory and technical leadership. Infrastructure and energy projects are continuing to anchor the demand that we're seeing. Data centers, transmission upgrades, interconnectors, all aspects that don't need me to tell, you'll see in many publications at the moment, are really underpinning the demand. Something that I think the guys at LinkedIn will come on to, specialist talent is becoming even more competitive, particularly in those skill sets I've already mentioned around project delivery, commissioning, data center infrastructure and clean energy engineering. But importantly, with that kind of challenge on talent, EMEA businesses are going to have to really increase focus on retention, mobility and leadership development, regardless of whether you're talking about permanent workforces or contingent labour. So from our point of view, the report summarises the fact that the challenges in the market are no longer about just acquiring talent. It's about keeping capability stable across multi-year project cycles. And certainly from our point of view, the EMEA market isn't slowing, it's maturing, it's becoming more strategic and demanding higher quality and future-ready teams. So off of the back of that, delighted to say we've got a panel of experts joining us today. Just to quickly, and then I'll ask them to maybe do a little bit of a deeper introduction of themselves. From LinkedIn, we have John McGrath, Head of Customer Success for Global Accounts, really looking at platform-wide hiring, mobility and skills insight for EMEA. Delighted to have Chris Brooks, CEO of Pentagon Technical Services, joining us on the call, global leader in data center and MEP projects. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining. And also, really importantly, Paul Mudd. Paul is Senior Director of TRS, Technical Workforce Solutions, a managed service partner of ourselves, supporting energy customers globally, but also Regional Vice Chair of the EIC and a close finger on the pulse of any regulatory, geopolitical and operational affairs that impact the market. Perhaps, everyone, if I could ask for a quick introduction of yourself, maybe starting with John.
Yeah, no problem, Paul. Thank you. So yeah, John McGrath said. So I lead customer success at LinkedIn for our global accounts and specifically within the staff and space. Been with LinkedIn now for about 8.5 years. And today I'm going to focus on a core insights product, which is called Talent Insights, and give you, as Paul said, a little bit of a flavour of what's going on in the talent marketplace.
Thanks, John. Chris?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Chris Brooks. I'm the founder and CEO of Pentagon Technical Services, or we're referred to as PTS. So we are providing project management, cost management, commissioning management across EMEA, and we are 100% in the data center sector. Prior to that, I was in Asia for 5 years, and before that, I was in the Middle East for 10. So still working in the critical infrastructure space. So I've had a really good visibility on different regions and different cultures and how we can obviously make construction better.
Thanks, Chris. Paul?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, as Paul's already said, actually, director at TRS, managed service provider, but most importantly for this call is vice chair for Energy Industry Council. So we support the energy supply chain with lots of data insights, let them know what projects are coming up, which ones they can bid and tender for. And from our perspective, and obviously yours, is where we can predict where the shortfalls are being talent.
Thanks, guys. And Scarlett, I'm conscious, haven't introduced yourself yet.
That's okay, no problem at all. Lovely to see you all, and hello everybody, lovely to be here today. I'm Scarlett Menzies, Senior Business Manager at Spencer Ogden, and I head up our Critical Infrastructure division covering our data centres and sustainability space across Europe. I'm targeted and focused on growing our presence, but also retention of our presence across the data centre sustainability in Europe.
Thanks, everybody. I think moving into probably the LinkedIn data, and John, with yourself, very aware that our data is led largely by what we're seeing as a business, and that may not be completely macro in its view. So really keen to understand and give people some takeaways about where the patterns may match, where you might be seeing slight differences, and what does it tell us in terms of future workforce behaviour. Yeah, over to yourself, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And if it's okay, I'd like to share my screen so I can just give people a visual of the product and the talent pool that we're going to be looking at. So hopefully everybody can see my screen now at this stage.
Thumbs up from me, I can see it.
Yeah, everybody can see my screen. And so this, just a caveat, I think the visual and the data that we're going to look at today, I think it'll be more of a perm view, to be honest, the contractor view. And through our partnership with Spencer Ogden and the work that I've done with Paul, we've looked at key titles, key skills, and key industries that would give us a fair reflection of the market when it comes to the report and what you guys have been seeing. So if you don't know what the Insights is as a product, I suppose maybe just a little bit of a context with that. You know, if you think about LinkedIn as a platform, we have 1.3 plus billion members, and we've basically got a digital representation of the global workforce on the back of that. Talent Insights is the product that gives you access to that data. So you can build a talent pool report based on any sort of job title, any skill set, any industry, and any location. What's quite unique about this, obviously it's LinkedIn data, so the caveat, it's not the global workforce, but it is directional, without a doubt. And it's also live. So this gets updated multiple times every single day. So it's a live representation of the talent pool. So a couple of things just to call out from the outset. 16% increase in the number of professionals year over year, and about 13% of the population change in jobs. Currently, live jobs, a significant number of live jobs, nearly 4,000 live jobs. Now, this isn't just LinkedIn jobs. This is jobs that we pull from about 40,000 different sources. And we've also excluded staff and recruitment companies as well. So this is the current live number of jobs globally. And like I say, not just on LinkedIn. I think a really important data point here for us to focus on is the hiring demand. So we can see here the hiring demand is extremely high, and it says basically that talent is very hard to hire. What this represents really is the activity on the LinkedIn platform. So the number of emails that this population is being sent versus the average that's out there for other talent pools. And we're going to probably talk about this trend throughout this conversation, but I think it really means as an employer or as anybody that's looking to engage this talent, you need to be very conscious of the fact that they are very marketable. And so your approach needs to be really at the highest level. So I think a couple of things that feed into this, like probably number one is it's not going to be quick. So there's going to be time that's going to take to hire this talent. So you need to really be thinking about starting early and really knowing what you're going to be looking in regards to hiring talent over the longer, mid to longer term rather than the short term. I think number two is your brand matters. Again, if you're in a space where there are very significant competitors who have a very strong brand, an employer brand is what I'm talking about here, it just makes it a lot more difficult because of the fact that this is such a high demand talent pool. So I think, yeah, timelines are important. The approach is super important. And then recognition of the fact that brand also really matters and is a differentiator when it comes to attracting this type of talent with this level of demand. I think from an industry perspective, and again, I think it feeds into how you think about attracting the right talent. So what we can see here is a number of different industries that we've selected. And again, like I say, through our partnership with Spencer Ogden, I understand that these are the ones that really matter. But we can see that the industries themselves, we can see the number of professionals, the increase over year, the number of current live job posts, but also then that hiring demand as well. So again, for the majority of these industries, there's significantly high demand for talent. However, there are some areas where the demand is lower. So again, if you think about that average, low to moderate means that they are not receiving the level of activity and outreach that the other industries would. And so sometimes I can imagine as an organization, you might be very interested in having somebody come from the specific industry, for example, data centers, whereas actually, if you were to broaden that scope and include areas like construction and civil engineering, the opportunity to have more talent in the pipeline quicker is higher based on the fact that they're in less demand than other industries. From a skills perspective, again, we can see here the top skills for this talent: engineering, project engineering, construction engineering, project commissioning, civil engineering. Again, I think all in line with what Spencer Ogden are seeing, and from the conversations I've had with Paul, all in line with what I think the industry looks like currently. I think one area that's quite interesting when we look at the fastest growing skills, supervision comes out on top. And again, I think there's a real need in the industry and space for the supervision plus level. And so it's very interesting that we've seen like 142% growth in contractor supervision on the platform. Other things like thermal engineering, infrastructure development, construction site management, site execution, power plant operations, plant engineering, again, all seeing significant increases year over year in demand and also skills growth on the platform. From a job titles perspective, again, the largest around civil project senior electrical engineers. These are again the largest number of professionals that have this job title as part of this talent pool. But interestingly enough, we're seeing a lot of the fastest growing titles being in the intern, graduate, and junior space. So maybe not exactly in line with what Spencer Ogden is saying, because again, I suppose from a contractor perspective, they really work with a lot of very skilled, very professional individuals. But again, I think it's interesting how organizations can start to think about this balance between interns and graduates, and also then contractors and highly skilled talent that they have within their workforces, and how they, as a HR team and HR function, balance both the fact that we're seeing 13% job movement, we're seeing high levels of attrition in certain organizations, which I'll show in a minute, but we're seeing a real need for organizations to be able to retain talent based on the fact that it's such an in-demand talent pool. From a company perspective, again, you'll all probably look at this list and see a lot of the companies based on the fact that they are very large in the industry and very well known. But again, what's very interesting here is the level of attrition. And I think that's the thing to look at here, is that organizations, and again, like I say, we're focused on very specific, very niche, very important talent for the industry. But again, you're seeing companies having like a 6, 8, 12, even 14, 15% level of attrition. And that attrition is over the last 12 months. And yeah, I think there's a real demand in the space, but there's a real need for organizations to recognize the fact that you need to either maintain or lower this, as well as thinking about hiring into the future as well. From a location perspective, if we look specifically at EMEA, we look at country level, we can see UK at the top here, the highest level numbers of talent in the space with a 6% increase year over year, very high demand. There's a lot of Middle East companies here as well. I know, again, maybe that's not in line with Spencer Ogden's data, but I know, again, there's a huge amount of talent. And again, with the hiring demand, you can see in this Middle East space, there's less low to moderate hiring demand for the talent as well. So interesting to see that a huge amount of talent coming from those countries as well. Paul, I know that's a little bit of a snapshot, but we only had about 10 minutes, but hopefully that was what you were looking for. And I don't know if there's any questions, anything that you'd like to follow up with.
Yeah, thanks, John. Really useful to see. And I think a lot of the messages you've just said there really coincide with what we're seeing in the market. I think as our global footprint, which is organically led by a lot of our customers, develops into some of those geographies, so are our opportunities. But yeah, we're certainly still seeing a huge amount happening in the UK, Germany, Baltic states, Nordics, some of those real traditional markets, supplemented by some of those growth regions that you were just discussing there as well. So thank you for the insight. Really appreciated, and lots of commonality, but also some tweaks as well. I think the fact it underpins quite a lot of the trends as well, particularly around that retention, how to retain workers, regardless of whether they're perm or contract workers, is really a theme we're probably going to see more of as we come into future months and years doing these reports and working with our customers.
100%. Thank you for running us through that, John. I think just to echo what Paul said there, it's really a true reflection of what we're seeing internally at Spencer Ogden. And Chris, I'd love to come to you, obviously somebody that you're involved in these day-to-day operations on site a lot, to understand what you're seeing and if that report reflects what you're seeing in the market as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, obviously, John's report and the demographic of people, and there's definitely people available, but they're quite often in the wrong locations, and then getting them to the right region and getting them compliant is the challenge. So if we put a job post up for a technical manager for Europe, we'd probably have 20 or 30 people from the Middle East apply for that job, and they've got the right skill sets on their CV 100%, and I've worked in that region, so they could definitely do the job, but it just becomes very difficult trying to get them from the Middle East. They don't have obviously the right visa to move freely around Europe, so it almost goes into that difficult box. And quite often the market we operate in, it's fast. So when a client asks for some support, it's generally quickly. I quite often say, when do you need it? And it was yesterday is the answer. So you don't really have time to do that. I think the earlier you get visibility on projects, you can make use of that labour. So I know some of the large general contractors operating in Europe have gone out to some of the regions in the Middle East and India as well, and they've gone out and done recruitment drives, knowing that they've got a large pipeline of projects coming up, and they've gone and hand selected 50 to 100 engineers, and then obviously had the time to get their visas and to bring them back into Europe. So that's a really nice, smart play. And I think if you've got a pipeline and you've got that upcoming work, it's a really smart move to manage your peaks and troughs. But yeah, so that's one part. So yeah, John's report was really interesting. And I guess Europe, there's a lot of opportunity in Europe the next couple of years. I think are gonna really pop. I think 2025 has been steady. I think 26 and 27 are going to be much busier, which is great news for us all. But obviously then you have the issues that we're talking about with people and skilled resource that then get headhunted or poached, or they move around because they can get some extra money. So that obviously then creates a pressure on the supply chain again. I see the UK as well, which is, it's definitely hotting up in the UK. I think the DC sector has been again steady, but there's so many large projects coming online 26, 27, and the UK doesn't have the benefit of being able to tap into the European supply chain and the Schengen visa, where you can pull resource from neighbouring countries. So the UK is obviously, it's quite unique, where with the Brexit rules as well, we are really dependent on the skills that we have in country. So that's going to be challenging, I think, as we move forward.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting what you said there about retention, Chris, because we can see the hiring demand going up. We can see that we need to also get these people on site quickly, but it's also when we get them people on site, making sure that we can retain them. And Paul and I was brainstorming earlier this week or last week, and we spoke about that it's a bit of a never-ending question, right? How do we retain our contractors, and what are we seeing the changes in the market? And Paul actually was speaking around how we, in the past or even now, when you hire a permanent resource, the interview process, the hiring process takes a lot longer, on the basis that you're hiring that person to be a person, right? You're bringing them in for the long term. They're going to be with you for a sustained amount of time, and you're really looking for the right personality. When we bring in contract resources, when we've got high demand on project, we're bringing that person in as a commodity. They need to come in, they need to get that job done for the 6 or 12 months. But is it really that we need to start treating those contract resources, hiring them as a commodity to get the job done? Yeah, you're coming on a 12-month contract, but how actually do we integrate you as part of our organisation so you feel like a permanent employee and you feel like a person, but you are actually here just to get that scope of work done? Paul, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit more, but when we had that conversation, it was really insightful.
Yeah, with the main thing of not then breaking any taxation and legal legislations per geography as well. So it obviously becomes quite complex, but the ability to hire, redeploy, rehire, and have people very warm and ready to go back, happily go back or stay on particular projects, I think is going to become more and more of that challenge. But that's obviously my view from an outsider looking in. Chris, I think I'd welcome your thoughts on that in particular.
Yeah, I think, it's a really good point as well. And I do say this to people, that contracting is a funny industry, because it's the one industry where we race to finish projects, and then at the end of the project there is no job for anybody unless you've got another contract to move on to. It's quite a special industry. I think it starts with the clients. I think the clients, there's so much work going on out there at the moment. If the clients, and they're obviously, the clients are tendering, they're going out to try and get competitive tenders, so they're going out to the market and bidding projects, which means the successful bidder finds out a couple of months before the project starts, so they've got limited time to build up their resource as well. And then there's obviously contractors that wasn't successful, so then they've got resource that they don't know what to do with it. So maybe if there was an open framework where contractors was allocated projects, so almost looking forward, and it was, you're going to work on this project and you will work on that project. So if you knew you had that work in your pipeline, you could retain your staff a lot better. You could obviously give them a bit of career development. You could invest in training as well in these guys to bring them on, rather than just giving them a 12-month contract and at the end you don't know where you're going to place them. So I think the more visibility that we have as vendors to the customers, it's better for everybody. And then the hire, train, deploy model, we do that at Pentagon, where we bring on guys. Quite often some of our clients don't have the time to bring on people that aren't skilled in the industry, so we bring them on, hire, train them on our customers' projects, and at the end we deploy them. And then if that relationship is mature, for every person that we deploy, we get the opportunity to bring in somebody new again. So that cycle just keeps going around, which is a mature way of partnering.
I think that kind of shows how often and constant you guys are hiring within Pentagon to make sure that you can continue to grow as your customers grow. Where are the skill shortages impacting your delivery or the client's delivery the most, would you say?
For us, it's definitely around the technical services. So it's obviously the data centers is more geared towards the technical services. MEP and commissioning is the main focus. There's a lot of obviously CSA requirements, but it's generally that's where the demand is. And anything electrical as well, there's obviously more electrical out of the MEP services as well in terms of a percentage. Anyone with electrical qualifications that have worked in that sector, they've got an appreciation of electricity, they could be brought in and trained up. And I think what we do is we have seasoned professionals that have got 20 plus years experience. So that's how we service our clients. But those guys and girls are getting older, and obviously they start getting towards the end of their career. So you've got to bring that fresh talent in, and that fresh talent needs to work alongside the experienced guys to learn that knowledge, because you can't learn it from a textbook. You can learn cable calculations and other bits and pieces, but you don't get the life skills from university. You get them from the construction site. So having those mentors to work with is so important.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what's important, is we're bringing people in from graduate level all the way up, right? And obviously John spoke about in his report that the hiring demand is growing. I think it was a 16% growth in professionals, which shows to us that it's not going to be quick to hire these MEP or these electrical professionals. Now that you can see and you've got visibility on what your skill shortages are and also what you need to do. Are you planning any differently for next year and the year after versus what you've done in the past?
Yeah, I think for us on our professional project management side, what we're advising our clients to try and remove some of the dependencies away from people on projects. Obviously, and there's technologies out there and solutions. So moving towards using innovation, but moving towards modular and construction. So you've got MEP prefabrication, design for manufacture and assembly. You've got volumetric construction. Quite often, what I see in Europe, I don't see too much of it. And again, that's maybe because the way the projects are awarded, there's limited time for all of this pre-engineering work that needs to take place. So I think if the projects are awarded earlier, it gives the contractors more time to go and do their prefab or their modular and construction studies, which then means you don't have the dependency to send 500 people to a project in Germany or Norway. And in the Nordics, it's more difficult because some of the projects are more remote and it takes longer to get there. So you've got more downtime, which again puts pressure on the projects. I think that's what we're advising our clients to definitely look along those lines. And then if you can use prefabrication, you're then moving the skills into the factory environment. And it means you don't need fully skilled operatives, like fully qualified electricians you have to have on a construction site. But in a factory, you don't need to have that. So you can start bringing through semi-skilled workers to obviously put together elements of the solution.
Great, that's really insightful. And I think if they would listen, that'd be great. Paul Mudd, I'd be really interested to come to you on that question as well and see if I know that you work very closely with some big customers and if that's what you're seeing and the same advice that you're giving out as well.
Yeah, I think we touched on some really valid points as well. And I think some of the advice and guidance we've given to those clients is looking at it not so much as cyclical with some of this work and when the projects happen, but more structural. So one of the things that we do, and I think there's a couple of points where we might have touched upon already, was looking at things of retention is a big one. Sometimes people just assume, or projects just assume that we're going to have that fallout, it's going to happen, we'll just backfill it with somebody else, and so on and so forth. But the challenge is there's only so many skills out there. And so we've been looking at different routes for people to find those right skills. So one of them was returners to work. That was a big one for us, especially when you're looking at STEM or getting women back into energy, because something like 70% of women that work in engineering don't go back into the same industry. And that's due to flexibility. So there are some big clients that we're working with and have been working with where we've been doing some big projects around returners to work, offering the type of fractional and part-time work, which, funnily enough, it had two benefits. One, people could come back into a flexible job. Two, they were paying less in NI as well because everyone was permanent and they've bought part-time and they're under the threshold. So there was it was a strange benefit that we were finding off the back of that. Again, you touched on a large number of people retiring, and what do they call it? The silver tsunami or whatever it's called. So there's a big challenge there. And especially when we're looking, you probably saw the report on GB Energy, where they were saying about upskilling, reskilling, and so on and so forth. So one of the big challenges that are there is there's a big assumption that everybody wants to reskill and that they want to upskill. But the reality is, of a recent project that I've run myself, is there was a high number of those individuals that actually aren't interested in moving into a different industry. They're not too sure about it. They see wage reductions. A lot of them now looking further abroad to the Middle East on contract roles after being permanent for 30, 40 years and so on and so forth. So there's a big challenge there to keep and retain those skills. And I think that usually we just overlook that and we think we'll just backfill it, it'll happen. And that's where it comes back to the project funds. The sort of resource planning part of it is most of the time we looked at a necessary evil from a recruitment sense. I've sat in on many client bid team meetings and what have you, where they've sat there and said, we'll deal with the recruitment later. Whatever happens, it will sort out, it's fine. But obviously we're coming to a bottleneck in the near future, not just right across renewables in general, where if all of these projects happen in a short period of time, at the same time, everybody's in the same pool looking for the same people. And that's going to cause some big challenges with some of the budgeting because the costs will go up and the prices for the projects, and people will be outbid. Then suddenly there'll be companies from abroad coming in and getting UK projects that they're trying to keep local content, local suppliers, so on and so forth. So it's a bit of a vicious circle, but there are routes to do it. It's just that people have to look a bit more structurally rather than cyclical to how these projects work.
And Paul, with your kind of EIC hat on, adding to that complexity, I think it mirrors what we're talking about within our insight report as well, that with a lot of our customers heading towards especially H2 of 2026, can see a real, whether you want to call it perfect storm or perfect opportunity against kind of a lot of projects clashing with each other, huge amount of investment, getting to sort of the time where those resources are needed. How does then the addition of regulation, permitting, funding, all those kind of more macro and political elements come into shaping the urgency of hiring as well?
Yeah, I'd say it's fantastic. Over the past few weeks, I've met with DESNZ and Cabinet Office and numerous people and talked about this, and it's great. I never quite get a straight answer, but as you would expect. But you need to remember when we go back with the things like regulation and permitting and policies and all that sort of stuff, it isn't just about what gets built, especially across the infrastructure side of things, but it's also the urgency of which we start to hire. And that's the challenge. And that's what I think is one of the knowledge parts, especially with policymakers, is they don't quite understand it as we do, because they're not at the coalface as such. And the challenge we've always had is you get to certain points of urgency in mandatory hiring and permitting where you suddenly see these cliff edges. It's never that smooth general hiring need that happens over time. It's still a learning curve, and trying to explain the pain that companies are going through, the conversation usually flips to apprentices, graduates, and so on and so forth, reskilling, upskilling. But again, when you're not close to what's happening day to day, a lot of that information gets lost, which is one of the reasons why we do what we do, and we try to take all that information from the supply chain and say, look, actually, what you're saying is this, but the real challenge is they just don't exist, or the hiring isn't going to happen quick enough, and we need to extend the net further afield in order to deal with that sudden peak that we're going to have. But again, that conversation happens, and then it happens again the next time. So I've got a meeting next week and mid-January again, and no doubt looking at what we're talking about, it's the same conversation. So it is a challenge. One of the interesting things that I had seen recently is the investors, private investors now, that are pivoting a lot from maybe the offshore wind side of things into the data centers. A lot more supply chain companies are now starting to work and look more at data centers, which is useful from one perspective, because they're probably companies that haven't traditionally gone out to recruitment agencies and looked further afield for people to support them. But it's quite interesting that it's all to do with confidence, with the funding and the financing. And they're seeing that if you've seen the DB Energy report, or you've seen in fact, I'll send them over to Emily and you, Paul, and you can forward it out to everyone if you like, actually. There's a grids for data centers report as well, all independent ones, but they're really interesting when it talks about, okay, there's another 200 billion with spending for AI infrastructure, which again, equally affects the battery side of things and the data centers. And that's just UK and Europe. When you look at that information and you look at that, you can see why there's a sudden pivot from investors to say, actually, let's start looking at this, which causes a problem with the wind side of things, because now that's already stalled and projects are already pushed to the right and so on and so forth. So it's the biggest challenge with all the regulatory stuff, especially around the security and the compliance and all those new skills or skills that people haven't traditionally recruited for, especially with smaller supply chain companies. They become a real challenge, but a fun challenge, because that's what they'll call upon you guys for.
Or you. And Chris, hearing what Paul's just said there in relation to more and more kind of companies and competitors and established organizations swarming towards infrastructure, critical infrastructure, data center builds, all that sort of thing. Do you see that in your area as creating more opportunity or creating more risk or complexity or disorganization? How do you view the kind of swarm towards data centers from your perspective?
It's definitely opportunity for me. So it's definitely one of the sectors I'd say that is thriving, and it's good to be in. But ultimately, it's construction. It's just a different form of construction. And I guess, like, I did my MBA in 2018, and I remember writing something on construction and innovation, and construction was like one of the worst sectors for taking up innovation. I think farming was the worst, and now that went above construction, and it wasn't attracting people. I think those days have changed now. I think construction is very exciting. There's a lot going on. You can travel the world. I'm an example of that. So you can literally travel the world, go anywhere. You could be in Australia tomorrow if you're an electrical project manager working on a job. So it gives you so many opportunities. And I think where maybe in 2018, which isn't that long ago, people was leaning more towards IT. I think now with what's going on with AI and what jobs are going to be safe and secure in the future, I think construction definitely is one of those sectors that is future proof for the next few decades based on what we need to turn out to support obviously all that technology. So yeah, there's definitely opportunity. I think, like I say, it starts with the clients. It always does. So it's having that partnering framework, visibility of what's coming on. It gives everybody in the market downstream time to prepare and get organised. And I think we spend so much time and money flying people around Europe, which doesn't make any sense, because there's local people in each region where we operate. So if with the right amount of time, you can go out to the local market and find the local people who speak the language, they have a better work-life balance because they get to go home to their families every night without obviously flying people from the UK or wherever and then being away from their loved ones, which has that mental health side of the industry as well, which is quite tough. More time, local teams, sending in maybe some international experience, so sending some subject matter experts into those regions if they're not necessarily geared up towards certain sectors, upskilling that team. And then you've got legacy in place and you've got a community that you're building. So that's the ideal world, and that comes with time. And I think we can make time. I think that's one of the things that we can actually do. If we keep doing it the way we're doing it, where we leave it late to a point and then it comes a scramble and we're flying people around, that's where the prices increase, because obviously you've got a burden to move people around. So that burden goes onto the client as well, which goes onto the capex of the project. So time is super important. And I think I always say to our teams that the pre-construction phase of the project is where it's generally won or lost. If you don't utilize that period and you get to the construction and all the good ideas that you could have implemented is too late now, then you're just in that delivery mode and it becomes pressure on everybody. So yeah, a lot of opportunity, and I think we just need more time to plan, get prepared.
That actually links to one of the questions that's come in while we've been talking to an extent. And Chris, welcome your view on it. Paul and John, yours as well. From what you guys are seeing in the markets at the moment, are you seeing any sort of geographical trends, any particular mobilisation of workers from one region to another that's either particularly attractive or just happening for whatever reason? We're certainly seeing still a big demand or opportunity for kind of internationally mobile contractors, but not necessarily under a single theme. Is anyone seeing any geographic aspects to hiring at the moment?
Do you want to go, John?
Are you going, John, or shall I go?
No, you're going ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, actually, because I was looking at something yesterday. I saw, and again, it's to do with funding and investment on the AI infrastructure and what have you, was the Netherlands. So as current standing, at least from the reporting perspectives, 27% of the people employed across the Netherlands now are from the digital economy. So as you can, that's a huge amount of people that are involved in that arena. So you can see why there's been this sudden flip of companies getting more and more involved in the Netherlands and some of their data center projects and what have you. So it's one to watch, because there's so many people on a permanent basis work in the same industry at the moment. So what penny's worth. It's quite interesting to be a market to keep an eye on.
Yeah, like there's new regions that are coming online as well. So the regions that are more stable, in the Nordics, Sweden, Norway, they've been obviously busy for a number of years now. So they've got people in region that can obviously that have the right skill sets for the projects, but you do have other regions. So I guess Finland is an obvious one where there's a massive program out in Finland now. Ideally, you want local Finnish engineers and project managers, but are they available? Probably not. Is there Finnish contractors? Yes, but have they got DC experience? No. So then the default position is to go and get a GC from another part of Europe and fly them in, which then means you get all of the other stuff that we was just talking about. Again, just time, and there's a lot of good contractors out there. They might not have data center experience, but they're good contractors, tier ones that are coming into the market as well, seeing lots of new entries into the market, and some of the names that are coming in are really well-known brands that have built and delivered some really complex stuff. So they can definitely deliver DCs given time and support from experts in the industry.
From just a pure talent insights perspective, so from a data perspective, we do see talent flows across countries and regions. And again, if we just go back to the search that I'd run and the skill set that we'd put in with Paul, we can see from a UK perspective, a lot of talent moving to the Middle East and also to Australia and America. You can see talent moving from Canada to France as well. And again, I suppose from a language perspective, it makes sense, but interesting to see Canadian talent over the last 12 months. It's insignificant numbers moving to France as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the Middle East is hotting up, obviously, as we know. So the UAE and Saudi are hot, and that's always attractive if you speak to somebody from the UK and Europe and offer them that lifestyle as well, which you can't. If you're trying to retain somebody, you can't necessarily offer that in the UK. You can't offer them the sunshine and that nice living by the sea lifestyle. So that is attractive. So those regions will get the pull as well. They'll be able to pull some good talent into those sectors, as well as the tax-free benefits.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And maybe Paul Mudd, I know your kind of remit is a global one for TRS in particular, but if you look at another question that's come in around the US's approach to tariffs and specifically the renewables market, what are you seeing in terms of the impact that's having on the EMEA landscape for talent and any investment into projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I just liked it actually because it is a really interesting conversation. But I'll use a client here. They might be on the call, you never know. From Orsted was a recent conversation as an example. So obviously, many have seen that they've had a dramatic shift and reducing headcount, and a lot of that headcount are from the US part of their business. So they've seen that as strangling a lot of their expansion plans and what they want to do. So they're reinvesting specifically just in one part of their business, which they're renowned for. So there's one example of a company that's obviously done a divestiture and what have you as well, but it's a way of sticking to what they know and reducing some of those costs and bits and pieces just because it's so unpredictable out there. One of the weird markets that's actually doing really well is companies that are relocating out of the US and relocating manufacturing facilities into Europe. So this came off the back of a company that supports the logistics of those companies and what have you. And they've just seen a huge spike of companies. One project in particular, I think there was 1,000 people they needed, and that was relocating. It was part of a division of a car manufacturer that wanted to relocate all their bits and pieces to Europe, because they said it was just too much hassle, too expensive, too unpredictable. They couldn't build their strategy around hiring plans. The support just wasn't there. So they just completely said, actually, we're going to move. But it's not just one company, there's multiples of. So they're looking at those companies that kind of support very large projects or manufacturing sites, or it's funny, like electrolyzer plants and what have you, relocating those as well. So that's a big one. So there is this big shift. But the way to find those projects probably isn't directly. It's talking to some of these companies that have locations in the US that are more around logistics and building and finding and supporting those companies that are looking to come into Europe. So it's quite a strange way to find out where that business is. But with that comes an increase in the hiring. And a lot of these companies aren't the traditional stuff that you might think. So it isn't so much the more experienced engineers, more so they're looking for those people that want to develop, that want to be upskilled, just a slightly different tact on what they're doing with their market space. So it's, I know Max obviously put that in there. There's a lot to it from what I've just said, but there's some really interesting investment in supporting those companies coming into UK and Europe.
Yeah, and I guess it mirrors exactly the kind of job titles that John was talking about earlier on from a LinkedIn perspective, of the kind of slightly more junior but developing into experienced engineers trend that we're seeing. Look, I think with a couple of minutes to go, just wanted to pull things to a head. Firstly, a huge thank you to you guys joining as a panel and offering your insight and the practical perspective that you've shared today, whether it be LinkedIn's data, our own intelligence, or kind of your lived experiences. I think something that stands out is a really clear but busy picture of where we're at today, but what the future also holds. And some of those themes, if I was to maybe summarize them, sit around the fact that we're saying to customers and clients there really is a need to start earlier, in the fact of planning, engaging. And we know that timelines for projects across EMEA remain extended, whether that be the approvals, onboarding, mobilization. It's taking a long time, but that kind of early planning and then communication of that planning is really critical when it comes to workforce execution. I think, again, another theme that really stands out is balancing that flexibility with stability. So having the teams that really give you that ability, but the flexing up and down because we're not getting that insight. So making sure there is the blend of the right operating model between perm hiring and contract hiring, I think, is really key and stands out. Thinking beyond borders as well, really listening to what Chris was saying, but also Paul and John with your international mobility. It's definitely a theme of wanting local but needing international still. So how do we really still balance that thinking beyond borders whilst executing locally as much as we humanly can? And that's certainly something I'll take away with my own Spencer Ogden teams to think about from a client strategy perspective. And then really leading the strategy of clients with a purpose. So making sure that we don't just talk to our clients purely about salary, and that we are talking about opportunity, development, retention, and all of those aspects. So thank you again, guys. Looking ahead, I think Q4 demand and going into 2026, it really does resonate that it's going to get busier and busier, potentially more challenging and challenging. But for those that get it right, the opportunity is exponential and really driven by some of those underpinning themes of data center expansion, grid modernization, commissioning, grid connection, all the stuff that we've spoken about. And those organizations that succeed next year will be blending together that foresight, that agility, and that collaborative workforce partnerships. And I hope the fact today that we've pulled together industry insights, client insights, and actually partner insights with some of the MSP providers around the world, coupled with Spencer Ogden's specialist ability in those staffing spaces, really resonates. So thank you again for everybody that has joined. Massive thanks to the people on the board. We'll circulate the report again, but we'd certainly welcome any feedback on the webinar. And I hope everyone has a great day, great Christmas, and I hope to see you at our next event. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks everybody. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.